Genshin Impact is your typical gacha game where you gamble for characters and empty your bank account if you're unlucky or if you're addicted to investing in your mains, which is why the game normally entices you to pull for characters by giving them attractive designs. And yet there's this certain subsection of fans that become intrigued to pull for characters by their mention alone, even without their appearances being revealed yet. Sometimes it's even possible that prolonged periods of facelessness can contribute to a character's hype and success when fans are relieved that they're finally able to match a name with a face when they're released. Although one shouldn't underestimate the power of a character attracting fans with their appearance alone, the fact that characters without official designs can amass a considerable fan base counters the idea that the gacha world is entirely characterized by game devs dangling good-looking characters before our eyes like treats the fans are supposed to salivate for. Faceless characters show us that character attachments run far deeper than that and demonstrate to us the unique power of lore crumbs in convincing players to pull for certain characters. So today I'm going to look into the phenomenon of fans obsessing over characters without official designs yet, and how that has turned out for characters who were formerly faceless and have now been released in-game, as well as an analysis for what works and doesn't when it comes to Hoyoverse dropping lore for future characters before releasing their designs. And I'm also going to look into the strengths and pitfalls of becoming attached to a character before they're officially released by the game. If you find these musings on Genshin character lore interesting, you might want to consider subscribing to the channel if you enjoy these kinds of content. Of course, it's hard to talk about faceless characters without mentioning the Yashiro Commissioner Kamisato Ayato, who influenced unparalleled amounts of obsession over a character which we didn't know would become playable back then. And even once we were informed of his playability through some few leaks, we still didn't know what he looked like, but he already had a considerably sizable fan base in spite of that, with many fans speculating on what his design could look like and writing fanfiction about him already based on what little lore mentions revealed about his personality. Then, when his drip marketing came out, he became the talk of the town not just because his character design was conventionally good looking, but because the 6-month-long question of what does Ayato look like was finally answered. It can be argued that his popularity at that time was greatly attributed to the fact that people knew who he was but didn't know what he looked like yet, and that interest has since waned for some. After all, curiosity may still be different from genuine interest. Like, I personally really wanted to know what Ayato's character would be like once he entered the game, even though I wasn't particularly drawn to his personality in and of itself. That type of curiosity still served as hype or good press, and it defined a phenomenon among Genshin fans that could no longer be ignored. Interestingly, however, he was not the first character to have been mentioned in lore while remaining faceless, and he is certainly not the character to have remained faceless for the longest time. At the start, we had Varka and Alice mentioned by Mondstadt characters, as well as Skirk mentioned by Child, though the latter had been shown to the Traveler already. Plus that Tsaritsa is also a major driving force of Teyvat's geopolitics, even without us ever seeing her appearance. So if Ayato's case wasn't particularly unique, then why was he the one to really shed a light on the phenomenon of obsessing over a faceless character? I think it's because with his case, it was easier to tell that his character would be released eventually within the Inazuma patches, unlike other characters whose arrival in the main storyline are rather unpredictable or seem to be saved for the very end. So people had a feeling they might get themselves a copy of Ayato in a few months, fueling the hype as opposed to the uncertainty of when Varka's banner will be made available. Another unique thing about Ayato's case is that there were also some clearer clues for what his design could look like, and that was the simple fact that he had a sister who was already released in-game, and the game seemed to have a trend of making relatives look rather similar. This way, fans were sort of guaranteed that Ayato would be the sort of beautiful blue-haired young man because he's Ayaka's brother. I mean, let's not get into how some parts of the fandom were fighting over which sibling looked better, but it really led to more accurate approximations of Ayato's appearance from fan arts. Aside from that, the voice lines about him were quite intriguing, painting him as this capable commission head who worked hard but had unique tastes and interests, from strange meals to TCG. He felt like someone who truly existed in the lore and was involved in the network of Inazuma characters, thus making us feel his presence more strongly, as opposed to Mondstadt characters all acknowledging Varka's character, but also speaking of him like some distant figure that they're not exactly close to. Meanwhile, Ayato had a sister, friends, colleagues that could give us more accurate assessments of him. I mean, his voice was even heard in Ito's character teaser that showed us exactly how involved he was with everyone, and it let fans know that he was going to appear soon. With all of these factors combined, it was hard to resist the pull of the Ayato fandom, with people speculating heavily on his character as a whole due to them having sufficient crumbs to make certain conjectures while still having a whole lot of unanswered questions about him. I mean, filling in the blanks isn't fun at all if there are too many blanks or if too many words are supplied to you already. It's fun because of the balance of things we know and things we don't know, so Ayato's appeal became great to character lore enthusiasts and creators of fanworks who are very adept at working with limited information. The speculations are what made the Ayato fandom enjoyable in its inception, and long after his release, his fandom seems to have shrunk tremendously due to there not being much to speculate on anymore. And also because he turned out a bit different than what we originally thought, but that's a conversation for later in the video. Although Ayato's case wasn't unique and not everyone who was curious about him ended up liking him, his case made us realize that mentioned characters are not to be overlooked because they have the potential to become our new future favorites. Because the fanwork producing side of the Genshin fandom already had practice with unearthing Ayato's lore crumbs and interpreting them, they knew how to compile lore on Kaveh before his release, and many people were already starting to analyze him thoroughly based on his notes on certain message boards. In my personal case, the mentioned character I paid attention to very closely was Chief Justice Neuvillette, who gave a quote on Nahida during her drip marketing, and at that time, I didn't even know this person's gender yet. But their line came across as insightful to me, so much so that I became interested in speculating on them and even pledged to pull for this character eventually, especially after Nahida confirmed the importance of the Chief Justice at the end of the Sumeru Archon quest. And now Neuvillette is definitely one of my favorites, which is why I'm grateful to have anticipated him much earlier. That goes to show how faceless characters allow us to engage in lore more deeply by paying attention to name mentions and gathering the voice lines of other characters to form an image of them in our heads. It allows us to get to know a person through a unique process and appreciate them for something that goes beyond admiring their appearance. It's a very fun endeavor for lore enthusiasts and people who pull characters for their lore and personality and aren't highly influenced by appearances. Faceless characters also contribute to world building by making us understand a nation's societal networks thoroughly through their interpersonal relationships, and they remind us to pay attention even to things we can't see. Their faceless era forces us to get to know them more deeply compared to other characters that people don't mind viewing shallowly as long as they're pretty enough. To illustrate my point, and please listen to the whole paragraph for the full context so you don't freak out. I remember when Shenhe was first drip marketed and I found her to be shoehorned into Liyue's story and found her presence to be rather pointless, with me viewing her as some sort of cash cow that ended up only taking space in the roster of cryo characters, and I was worried that Chevreuse would run out of ideas faster by introducing more characters randomly. However, when she actually came out, her lore was deeply touching and showcased the power of reclaiming your own story and finding your strength. So, if we got to know her a little bit from some voice lines several patches before she was released, instead of just accessing them in 2.3, then I might have felt a greater connection to her already and I wouldn't have judged her character harshly. I mean, I know it's my fault for being so judgy, but it really is hard for me to get attached to characters with minimal information about them. So introducing a character out of the blue with us relying mainly on their appearance to make an assessment of them doesn't work well for some people. And that's why having new characters that aren't part of the Archon quest spend some time being faceless can help people warm up to them so they can be more easily welcomed by players once they actually get released. And they will seem like they're actually part of the lore and not just randomly shoved in there for the sake of a cash grab. However, while faceless characters do appeal to fans who don't care about characters' appearances theoretically speaking, in reality, it's more so the case that fans have expectations about a character's appearance based on a certain image they have in their heads. So character reveals can lead to huge levels of disappointment if fans have hyped up certain fan designs too much beforehand. Heck, even Ayato got that treatment to some degree, with fans being disappointed in his modern-looking outfit compared to the kimono he seemed to have hanging in the Kamisato residences, and I'm sure there were many other complaints as well. These complaints can range from unreasonable to reasonable, with some fans complaining that the character just doesn't have a color scheme they like, all the way to fans being rightfully disappointed in Hoyoverse's seeming lack of desire to explore diversity in their designs. For example, people are rightfully worried that Varka will end up looking like he's in his 20s or early 30s, completely clean-shaven and soft-looking, because it seems like he's implied to be born in the same generation as Jean's mom, especially with the way he talked to her about Mika like they're close friends. Plus, he is described to be quite strong and highly interested in battles, especially wielding his greatsword, so fans might not like it if he looks too delicate. In Skirk's case, it's kind of a mixed bag because I think fans assumed too much that she'd be designed as a tall woman with darker color motifs. Even though there's no mention of that, and even though she met Child in the Abyss, she didn't necessarily need to be from the Abyss as well, so the lighter, more ethereal colors on her clothes could hint at her otherworldliness sufficiently. People also expected her to have battle scars as a warrior, even though she was probably strong enough to come out of battles unscathed. Regardless, critiques were also valid in calling her design rather generic, with its silhouette not being unique for your typical Hoyoverse female character, even though her character looking distinct might have matched her lore better. So I understand the disappointment surrounding her design to some degree. So these cases shed light on the ways in which obsessing over a character before they appear on screen can lead to great disappointment. And in actuality, disappointment can also go beyond appearances alone. In Ayato's case, some fans, including myself, found him to be somewhat lackluster upon his release in contrast to his hype beforehand. That could be partially because his fanon depictions, as in the fan-made speculation surrounding him, ended up not perfectly aligning with his canon personality. Actually, I would say that his fanon personality isn't extremely different from his canon personality, but it's more like fans would emphasize or exaggerate certain traits of his more than they were in canon. I think fans were mainly drawn to Ayato's unconventional attitude, with him liking strange meals and drinks, finding Ito's play amusing, playing TCG, aiding the resistance, and being dubbed a rascal by Yaemiko. And yet they disregarded the fact that a successful commissioner should possess some level of conscientiousness and propriety as well, so they were quite surprised when he seemed to be presented as more stoic, well-behaved, hard-working, and closed off, compared to being depicted as more subtly rebellious and possibly even mischievous in fanworks. It is true that Ayato can both be conscientious and sly in varying degrees, with him still saying he delights in seeing his retainers' panic-stricken reactions, showing that his mischievous personality is not completely gone in canon, but it is far more subdued than it ever was in fanon, so fans didn't know what to make of his completely proper Ayato, who started to appear rather stiff to some of us. So while Ayato's case of popularity before his release encouraged the phenomenon to continue over to other faceless characters, it also served as a cautionary tale against becoming overly attached to speculations. Nonetheless, I wouldn't say it's completely the fandom's fault for bringing upon their disappointment. Sometimes the game can also be partially at fault for leaving misleading or insufficient hints about their unreleased characters. In Ayato's case, I would argue that his more sneaky side was played up a little bit and not showcased enough in his character, although I'm not sure if I'm remembering perfectly. For a clearer example, it must have been strange to hear Ayato being amused by Ito's play, only for his voice line about the Oni to seem rather distanced and slightly hostile in the earlier rendition of the English dub, although I heard it has changed since. Perhaps if the game left more information about Ayato's newly passed laws, then that would cement him more as a serious politician in a way that fans could better anticipate, but I also wouldn't say his pre-release lore crumbs were that horribly misleading anyway. In contrast, Kaveh's actual characterization pleased fans without leaving much room for disappointment because he did turn out as expected, being the idealistic artist he was. And I think what contributed to that is the fact that he got to speak for himself through the message board posts, allowing us to assess his character based on his actual stated beliefs instead of relying on his reputation alone. I also felt a similar amount of satisfaction getting to know Neuvillette in-game, because his first lore crumb was his own stated opinion, so it's easier to infer his wisdom and fairness from that. So basically, I think that characters whose dialogues we get to hear before their designs are released are more likely to be assessed by the fans correctly if they have enough analytical prowess, that is. As for characters whose lore crumbs come mostly from voice lines of other characters and their overall reputation rather than their personal statements, there are still notable differences in quality among the bits of information shared to us by other characters. Let me give Chiori and Emily from Fontaine as an example. Chiori already appeared in the event and Emily hasn't made any kind of appearance yet, but they both spent some time being faceless. I was easily drawn to Chiori because of the voice lines about her, with characters describing how they'd interact with her, revealing her strict, particular yet generous personality. Meanwhile, voice lines about Emily mostly involve characters talking about her perfume rather than her personality in and of itself. Thus, Chiori's voice lines do seem to reveal a bit more about her than Emily's do. With this in mind, we can sense that some faceless characters have more detailed and more revealing lore crumbs available pre-release over other faceless characters. It's worth noting the quality of the information you're dealing with when speculating on an unreleased character, because some information, such as personal statements or personal testimonies from acquaintances, are more valuable or more telling than descriptions from people who don't know them that well. So do proceed with caution in your speculations if the character in question doesn't seem to have detailed information on them so far. That way you can accept a greater margin of error when it comes to the characterization you came up with, and that acceptance will prevent you from encountering immense disappointment later on. However, you can be more confident in your character analysis if there seems to be enough quality information on the faceless character already, such as in Kaveh's case. Although information quality can determine how accurate our analysis of pre-released characters will be, it's still the analyst's job to draw sensible conclusions from existing lore without making too many assumptions. I will admit that as someone who likes to preemptively analyze characters before their release, as I have done with Neuvillette before, assumptions are needed to create some substantial image in our head, right? But it's good to remain open-minded and accept the various possibilities for canon portrayals, and it would be good to actively consider what these alternative depictions could look like. Considering the limitations of our own pre-release portrayals is a step to managing expectations while also continuing to have fun with our speculations. I don't think we should completely get rid of our expectations surrounding unreleased characters because they do have reputations for a reason. They're meant to guide us in anticipating their personalities, and we do the same when asking others for their opinion on someone they know who we're gonna meet in the future. For example, in my university, we tend to ask people about the reputations of certain professors online, and information dissemination comes very easily. We can't disregard information just because it's partial, because in real life we often have to work based on incomplete information anyway. Forming expectations is natural to humans, and it's greatly helpful when dealing with uncertainties in social interactions. And I think the writers are aware of this, so they wouldn't give a character a reputation if it was just meant to be completely disregarded. It's there for a reason, and if it turns out to not be completely accurate, I think it's just a matter of missing puzzle pieces as opposed to outright wrong puzzle pieces. So we can still make use of existing information on unreleased characters instead of completely doing away with any kind of speculation. As I said, there are ways of managing expectations without going to the extreme of not thinking about the character at all. Just be cautious with your portrayals and analyses, and be willing to learn and adjust based on updated information. With all that said, I have noticed that there is a notably greater chance that a male character would end up spending time without a release design compared to a female character. I think this is because the company might feel confident about the appeal of their female characters, that they feel like they can just release them out of the blue and everyone will simp for them, whereas they might have this assumption that it's a bit difficult for a male character to become popular instantly without any sort of background information on them. Of course, it's just a speculation, but I do notice that lots of characters that come out of nowhere are women, and since I'm not into character appearances alone, I often find myself feeling very isolated being on the fence about them while so many people are thirsting over them already. So yeah, Hoyoverse doesn't need to give a woman a background at all before drip marketing her, and they could still earn a lot from people who wanna C6 or 5 her. However, I still think female characters deserve more detailed pre-release lore crumbs, as it also helps to draw in fans who are interested in lore, and it allows this woman to actually feel like she's a part of that nation's society as a whole. These lore crumbs help to cement her reputation and allow fans to get attached to her more quickly and more deeply beyond appearances. That's why I appreciate Hoyoverse going this route for some Fontaine women whom they allowed to be faceless for a short amount of time to drum up curiosity about them as well. I personally enjoyed what they did for Chiori, and it has convinced me to save up for her release in case she's a 5-star, and that goes to show how effective pre-release lore crumbs can be, and I think it can contribute to the overall improvement of Genshin's writing of female characters in terms of personality, lore, and storyline. So yeah, I hope they continue to have lore crumbs for faceless women, even in Natlan. Speaking of Natlan, we might already have a faceless character from there, aside from the Archon, and that's Xbalanque, who gave a quote on Neuvillette during his drip marketing. Although I would say the quote doesn't reveal much about Xbalanque's own personality, I do think him speaking about Neuvillette helps to draw interest in Natlan and discover more about someone who has access to lore about the primordial dragons, if in case he is playable. With him giving a quote on a character that used to be faceless, I do think that faceless characters will continue to be a part of Genshin's world building and character advertisement strategy. So I think fans can continue to feel more excitement for future characters who already have lore crumbs without being released yet, and I hope that we'll get even better at analyzing these characters and that we'll somehow be satisfied at the end. I personally do hope for Xbalanque to be good, as his name comes from one of the Mayan twin gods, and I am slightly looking forward to Natlan, so looking forward to Natlan's characters is naturally part of that. Even future Archons are faceless, so I guess anticipating character reveals is just a natural part of Genshin fandom culture now, and it's undeniable that they'll continue to influence our pulling decisions for as long as the game runs. How about you guys? Who was your favorite character who was previously faceless, and which currently faceless character are you anticipating the most? Are you excited or nervous for their future release? And if you liked this video, please leave a like, and you can consider subscribing to the channel if you enjoy detailed analyses of Genshin lore or fandom phenomena like this, and I will join you in manifesting that your favorite faceless character will have a stellar design once they come out. That's all, and I'll see you next year.